Wherever two or three are gathered, he is in their presence. Now, I like what Ron was talking about here, that instead of getting all confused with what's going on in the world and all upset and bitter, talk about Jesus. It's the most amazing thing. When you start talking about him, he's there. And what is he? The Prince of Peace, right? Yeah. So, and remember, it's only two or three. You know, talk to somebody. There's just two of you then, right? I'm astounded at how many people say two or more. Yeah. And they ought to know better. It's two or three. God is not impressed with numbers. Well, last week I talked about the gospel in the sky. You know, there's general revelation and there's special revelation. General revelation is kind of like what we see in chapter 1 of Romans, where it says that he has put a knowledge of you in him, of him in yourself. And, you know, it goes on to say that you deny that at your peril, right? But we see, if we open up our eyes, we see that there is a creator for the creation, right? Now, philosophers are going to, you know, and scientists are going to contradict that. And, of course, they make a pretty good argument. But the thing is that even they are deceiving themselves, because God has placed a knowledge of himself in them too, right? And we need to remind them of that. Don't let him get away with it, folks. Well, what is the gospel in the sky? Is it general revelation or is it special revelation? I think it's general because everybody can see it. Saint and sinner alike. But it's special in that it carries a message the same way as the Bible carries a message. The Bible is considered to be special revelation, and I think the gospel in the sky is special revelation as well as general revelation. So I want to continue with that today. I didn't have enough time to go into everything, and today I might go over time because there's just so much involved, and I don't want to take any shortcuts here because there's just so much that will strengthen your faith and glorify God. So last week I talked about the Mazzaroth. That's what it's called in the book of Job. And actually it means, there are several different meanings. Organization is one of them, association, but it's really talking about the patterns of stars that have been given names that actually represent a story. And the story that they represent in this particular case is the gospel. Now, let me just preface this with a little bit of astronomy for you. An atom has a nucleus and it has electrons moving in all different planes around the nucleus, right? Like planets orbiting the sun. But the solar system isn't like that. The solar system is all on one plane. If you draw a line, you'll see from the sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, all on the same plane, all right? And if you extend that plane, it's called the plane of the ecliptic. If you extend that from the Earth through the sun for 365 days, you'll see the Earth as it moves in its orbit. By appearance, the sun moves into one of 12 constellations every 2 months. No, every month, sorry. So, are you following me so far? So, there's 360 degrees in a circle, right? That's the orbit of the Earth. And if you break that into 12, what do you have? You have 30 degrees. 30 degrees. So there are what they call houses. There are 30-degree houses. Within those 30 degrees, like we're going to talk about Aries today, I'm making this as simple as I can. I might stumble over myself here trying to make it this simple. But there are what's called decans. You take that 30 degrees and divide it into 3 tens, all right? Each one of those 10s is a decan, which comes from the Greek word for 10, right? And within those decans, you find other constellations and other stars that relate to the main star in that house. The first house is in the spring, and the last house is in the winter, approaching spring. So you have the first house is Aries, Aries the ram. You go right through the 360 degrees and come back to Pisces before Aries. Okay, so Aries and Pisces are together. So you have Aries as the first house, Pisces as the 12th house. Okay, now in the middle of those, you're going to have Virgo, which is at 180 degrees in the orbit. You following me so far? So where does the story that if the gospel is in the sky, where does the story begin? Now, most people say that the story began with the Virgo, the birth of Christ, right? But I say the story begins with the ram caught in the thicket. And then it goes right around to Virgo, and all the way to Virgo from Aries is talking about the Old Covenant. Then when you get to Virgo, from Virgo to Pisces, it's the New Covenant. Pre-Christ, post-Christ. Not that difficult. But is it true? I mean, we can make these wild claims, but can we really validate them? Particularly when you consider that there is mythology that is telling you a whole different story. And they're using the same patterns in the sky. Before I go on, there are only 12 patterns because they've all got to be on the same plane, right? You follow me? They've got to be on the same plane of the ecliptic. Okay. So fasten your seatbelts because I've got a lot to go through here today. It's going to be tough. We'll see what we can do. The preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written was upright, even words of truth. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Genesis 22, verses 1 to 8. I think this is where it all starts. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. Isn't that interesting? God calls you and say, Here I am, Lord. Then he said, Take now your son, your only son, Isaac. No, that's the wrong word. It's not only son. It should be your beloved son. And I don't know why everybody gets this wrong. Every one of them. I don't know of any translation that doesn't do this. Say, your only son. He had 2 sons, folks. This wasn't his only son. The word translated only, it better translated beloved, the one I care for most, right? So take your beloved son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son. And he split the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place which God had told him. Now, verse 4 is important. Then on the third day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. You know, lifted his eyes is actually an idiom. It speaks of prophetic vision. Prophetic vision. And we actually see that he did see what was going to take place. And that's why Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we'll come back to you. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the 2 of them went together. So Isaac is carrying the wood up to the place of the sacrifice. And on the way, he's thinking, I've got the wood and we got the fire. Where's the sacrificial beast? Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, my father. And he said, here I am, son. I like that. Here I am, son. Then he said, look. Hey, why does he say that? You know what I think it is? I think that this is a tradition where they say, I want to make you aware that I'm really listening to you. Right? So Abraham took the wood and burnt offerings and laid it on Isaac his son, and took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the two of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. Then he said, look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering. So the two of them went together. There is a rabbinical tradition that this statement is misread, that it's really saying, my son, God will provide himself as the lamb for the burnt offering. So the two of them went together. This is a historical account of a real event that occurred more than 4,000 years ago. It's about 2000 BC. And it was a prefigure of what would happen at Golgotha when God would receive the sacrifice of his own son, right, for the redemption of fallen man, in accordance with the promise he made in Eden, the garden, to Adam and Eve. The first thing I want to point out is the significance of verse 4 and verse 8, and that's what I just did. I want you to know that Abraham had a vision. He saw what was going to happen 2,000 years later. He also saw that God was going to do it for himself. He was going to sacrifice himself. Amazing. A careful reading will show you that he did see into the future. And I wish I could remember what verse it is in, I think it's in Romans. Can somebody look that up? Where Abraham actually saw the sacrifice that would take place. It's actually stated in the New Testament. I just can't remember where it is. Well, the scriptures continue in verse 14 to call this event Jehovah Jireh. And that's commonly referred to as God my provider. But actually it's a compound Hebrew word that means the existent one will show up or will appear. The self-existent one will appear. And you know, when he appears, miracles take place. It's amazing. We think of God, you know, when God appears, something happens. Could it be something good or something bad? And I think that if God shows up, it's only for good. Only for good. The devil likes to show up for evil. And if God shows up, he'll counter the devil. But there's so much of this idea that God produces evil in order for good to occur, right? And Paul talks about that, as a matter of fact, and how wrong that is. Yes, that's it, good. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day and saw it was glad. That's John 8:56. John, I thought it was Romans, but John 8:56. So that's just a validation that he really did lift his eyes. He saw prophetically. He actually saw what was going to happen. And that's why he knew that, well, he knew exactly what was going to happen. Truly, God did appear in the person of Jesus some 2,000 years after Abraham took the ram from the thicket in substitution for his own son. As it is written in 2 Corinthians 5:21, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. It's a substitution. He substituted himself for us. There was no other way it could be done. Levitical law says that in order for a dispute to be satisfied, it must be dealt with by both parties in the dispute. Both parties. So, how could God do that unless he became both parties in the dispute? The promise of Jesus as our substitute was in the heavens long before Abraham. And last Sunday I introduced you to that with the Zodiac and the significance of the various signs. I went through all 12 signs just briefly, and I just want to hit Aries specifically today. There's a lot to say about Aries. I don't know how many more of these I'm going to do, but Aries is really important, so I figured we'd start with this one anyway. I showed that it was first mentioned in the book of Job, in Job 38, verse 32, where it is called the Mazzaroth, which is from the Hebrew word Mazarah, which means distinction. You know, there's all sorts of things we can say about the Mazzaroth. There's an association involved here. There's importance that's involved here. There's preeminence that's involved here. And Mazarah is from the root Nadza, which we get Nazareth from, or Nazarene, and it actually means to separate or consecrate. So again, we can have to separate, to consecrate, to associate, to be distinct, to be preeminent. All of this is in that word, Mazzaroth. If we look at the pictograms that make up the word Matzarah, it's not difficult to see its connection with the one whose story is laid out in the heavens. Now, if you move that to the next slide, Camille. There we go. Now, where'd that one come from? You made it? Okay. All right, we'll start with this one, okay? Mazzaroth. From Mazarah, which is Strong's number 4216, held in distinction. It's a noted constellation. Well, actually, it's a group of constellations. And now if we look at the Hebrew pictograms, go to your, there we go. Mem. That's the Hebrew letter Mem, and it means water or blood. Interesting, huh? The next one is Zion. Zion is a hatchet, or it was, in its early days, it was a plow. Now, as a hatchet or plow, and incidentally, you notice the word, how plow is spelled? And I thought, you know, I'm not sure if that's right. So I checked it up, and it's my inculturation showing up, because that's how it's spelled in Australia. Here it's P-L-O-W. I'm surprised, Doctor, you didn't catch that. So, what's it talking about? It's actually made up of a vav, which is kind of like a nail, and a yod, which represents the hand. You see the hand on top of the nail. You see that? You follow me? Now, when you see a Hebrew letter like that, you can see that there's maybe more to the story here. Vav is actually a nail, and a nail is used to hold things together, to put things together, okay? And the Vav is a hand, and the hand is for desire, to reach for something. It represents work. So to put together work, also to separate, because you put, it's like to cut something from and to cut something unto. You follow me? Separate from or separate unto. Got it? So it's all there. So to cut or to separate, but King of Kings. Now, this letter, Zion, is quite often used to represent a king, somebody extremely important. So we have here a King of Kings because he is separate and to separate, and also he is represented by a plow, and a plow is to turn the ground over in preparation of planting, right? And the planting has to occur before there can be a reaping, right? I hope you can all see this. So much wrapped up in that word, that letter. Then you have Resh. Resh means the head, and head can mean the first or the most prominent, the preeminent, that which leads, right? A captain is capitis, the head in the Latin. So Resh is the first or the prominent. And then He. He is actually a window. And you see it given as, I can't do it because my shoulders are so bad, but it's like that. Wow! Look. So what we have here, go to the next slide, Camille. Back to the other one. Back to the other one. Okay. So when you put it all together, I don't think it's a stretch. The Masoret says, behold the blood of the King of Kings. He is the one who separates and consecrates. Okay? I don't think that's a stretch at all. This is the gospel in the stars. Behold the King of Kings, the blood of the King of Kings. And what? The blood? The life is in the blood, folks. And remember, the plow is talking about life because it's a planting and a reaping. What happened? Here we go. So that is looking at the Masoret in a way that will escape you if you don't understand that Hebrew words are not just words. They're pictures of theological concepts. So, behold and observe and be amazed is really what the Masoret says. The authors of the various books that deal with this subject begin the story of the gospel as written in the stars with the sign Virgo, as I said. And it seems that that is natural. You know, people would think that's the way it should be. I want to say one other thing about that, too. There are 2 new years in Israel. We just started the new year last week, I think it was? Rosh Hashanah. Rosh, the head, Hashanah, the head of the year. And that was what's called the civil new year. So the civil year starts now in the fall. But come around 180 degrees, and you're at spring, and the spring is Nisan, the March, April area. That's when Aries occurs, and that is the time of the sacred new year. So you have a secular year and a sacred year. Got it? So the secular new year starts in the fall, but the sacred year starts in the spring. And that's what we're dealing with here at this particular point with Aries. So I believe that this is where the gospel begins, with the ram which replaced Isaac as a sin offering. In the same way, Jesus became our sin offering according to Levitical ordinances. From Aries the ram, the Zodiac takes us systematically through the virgin birth of the Redeemer and on to the coronation of the King of the fishes. And remember, the fish was a sign of Christianity before the cross was, right? I know Jesus died on a cross, but the early church did not use the cross as its symbol. It used the fish as its symbol. And the fish is a group of Greek letters that together actually, as an anagram, say, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, Savior. And I said last week, because the Christian church was outlawed, when you met somebody and you wanted to find out whether or not they were brothers in the faith, you would stand in front of them and inscribe an ark on the ground with your foot. And if he was a brother, he facing you, he would inscribe his ark with his foot, and it would make a fish. So, fish, king of the fishes, very important. Not only that, but there are fish and there are goats. And as we look at some other constellations like Capricorn, for example, which is actually a goat becoming a fish. So goats are willful. I don't know why. They're cute little animals. They really are. It's amazing what they can do, too. But they're traditionally thought of as being evil and rebellious, stubborn. But then you've got, yeah, there we go. Then you've got, are they really? Really? They're just cute little animals. But anyway, they are representative traditionally of rebellion. But the fish all move in the same direction, right? Goats run around everywhere. But fish, they form schools. So we've got unity involved, right? Unity. And the great thing about Christianity is that the unity does not take away your individuality, right? There is not uniformity. There is unity without uniformity. And that's really important, that you can be you, unique from everybody else, and still be a part of the school of fish. Huh? How about that? Now, another thing that makes, I'll go back a little bit. From Aries the ram, the Zodiac takes us systematically through the virgin birth of the Redeemer and onto the coronation of the King of the fishes, picturing the reign of the Lord Jesus at the end of the age. Another thing that makes Aries the logical beginning for the gospel is that in the natural, the ram is the chief or the head of the flock, even as Jesus is the protector and leader of the church, his body. In fact, the ancient civilizations knew this first constellation, Aries, by many different names that all relate to incredibly to the gospel more than to any mythical construct. The Hebrews called it Teleth, which means the lamb sent forth. Teleth, the lamb sent forth. And the Greeks knew it as Krios, which means the lamb. The Akkadians, that is ancient Babylonians, called it Bataziga, which means, I like this, the altar or the sacrifice that makes right. The sacrifice that makes right. And of course, its Latin name is Aries, which means the ram, the chief, or the head. Within the periphery of Aries, within that area of Aries, this is getting into the decans. Every 10 degrees, within that 30-degree section called a house, you have a decan. And in the first decan, we see the constellation Cassiopeia, or it used to be known as Andromeda. And this is not a part of the zodiac proper, but rather as part of the 30 degrees that each zodiacal sign occupies in the plane of the ecliptic. You all following me so far? All the figures that appear within the 30-degree boundaries of each house or each zodiacal sign contributes to the symbolic meaning. So when you have 3 10-degree sections within a 30-degree house, each one of those sections has stars or constellations that relate to the main constellation in that house, right? Cassiopeia is a woman enthroned in a chair. She is arranging her robes with one hand, while in the other hand, she holds a branch of victory and arranges her hair. And the name Cassiopeia means the enthroned one, the one who's be put on a throne. I think she represents a church. She may well be the victorious church, which is lifted up, enthroned, and glorified. There is a star in Cassiopeia that the Hebrews call Shiddah, which means the freed one or the liberated one. We will know the truth, and the truth will make us free. She has been redeemed from her former estate. Remember, we were fallen. And then Jesus comes along and says, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. I will make you brand new." She's been redeemed from a fallen state, and now fixes her robes and arranges her hair as she awaits her marriage to the king. In her former estate, she was threatened by Cetus, the sea monster, or the Leviathan, which is another figure in the periphery of Aries in the second decan. So we have Cassiopeia with Aries, and we also have Cetus, the sea monster, or the Leviathan, in that same house. There are 3 significant stars in this Cetus, the sea monster. It's Mira, which is Hebrew for rebellion, Menka, which means the bound or the chained enemy, and Diphtha, which means the one who was overthrown. These are all fitting titles for Satan. Satan, the one who is the enemy of the church. It's Satan who threatens the church. It is Satan, the Leviathan, that threatened Cassiopeia, and it was Christ who freed her so that now she's awaiting her marriage to the king. The next and the final figure in Aries is Perseus, which is Greek for the breaker. Perseus means the breaker in Greek. And this is in the 3rd decan. The Hebrew word for breaker is peretz. The Hebrew word for breaker is peretz. And if we look at Micah 2, verses 12 to 13, we find that same word. It says, "I will surely assemble all of you, O Jacob. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel." Who's he talking about? He's Christ. He's going to do this. "I will put them together like sheep in the fold, like a flock in the midst of their pasture. They shall make a loud noise because of so many people. And the one who breaks open, the one who peretz, the one who breaks open, will come up before them. They will break out, pass through the gate, and go out by it. The king will pass before them with the Lord at their head." So Jesus is the peretz. Now, Greek mythology identifies Perseus not as Jesus, but as the son of a god who was conceived in a virgin by a golden shower. It sounds like the same thing, doesn't it? His life was one of persecution. Sounds like Jesus, doesn't it? But he finally overcame all adversity and presented his father with the gift of the head of the Medusa, a monster that turned men to stone when they stared at her. It was Perseus who freed Cassiopeia. Jesus freed the bound woman, right? Then known as Andromeda, the chained woman. He freed her from being devoured by Cetus the Leviathan. Typically, the stars in Perseus help to reveal his nature to us. In the waist of Perseus, we have the star Mikfer, which means the one who helps. In his right shoulder is Algenib, which means the one who carries away. Perseus holds in his hand the head of the Medusa. And the Hebrews knew the Medusa as the trodden underfoot, the one trodden underfoot. Medusa's brightest star is Algol, which has been contracted into Algol, and it means the evil spirit. Another star of Medusa is, in Hebrew, Resh Satan, which means the head of the accuser. So he's holding up the head of the accuser. And clearly, in these figures, we can see the promise of one who would come to free man of satanic rule and prepare him as his church to be his own bride. But, without doubt, there are those who would contend that the constellations are nothing more than a way of ancient peoples to remember and transmit myths. They would say that the story of Jesus is also an allegorical construct, passing along distilled wisdom in a highly symbolic format. They would say, as a friend of mine once said, it is an inspiring, successful myth, but a myth all the same. Right? Now they'll latch onto this and look at Greek mythology and say, look at the similarity. And people do that with the Babylonian myths too. Like the difference between Noah and the Babylonian, who supposedly built an ark just in a local flood, not a worldwide flood. But is it? Can we really say that this is just another myth? That Christianity has kind of hijacked the Roman myths and the Greek myths? Well, I don't think so. Surely, it's just speculation on our part, because which is more prosperous? The Christians reinterpreted the myths, or the originals were reinterpreted as myths. And I think that the originals were reinterpreted as myths. This would probably remain forever an unanswerable question, if not for the reality of Jesus. See, that's the point. Jesus solves the problem. He is a historical fact. And we know that everything that we associate with Jesus is it's put out in these stars, in the names of these stars and these constellation groups and what they mean. Jesus has proven that the message in the stars was God's original revelation of the fulfillment of his promise to Adam and Eve at their fall. The real purpose of the Zodiac is to renew or reveal to all that God is in control of the destiny of man and that he keeps his word. And it's so important for us to understand that there is truth. And everything in our culture is trying to get rid of truth as an absolute. But there is absolute truth, and it's found only one place, and that is the Bible. And if your truth is in agreement with the Bible, you have absolute truth. And remember, the Bible promises that the truth will set you free. Free from what? Free from confusion. free from error, free from being a pawn of the devil, free from being a useful idiot. And I just found out just recently, and I want to show this at the church here in the next week or two. I want to show a video called The Agenda. There are two of them. There's the Agenda and the Agenda 2. And I'd like to show both of them. I don't know which one I'll show first, probably Agenda. And it was, I think it was put together around 2014. Agenda 2 was, I think, 2016, somewhere around there. The first one is about how communism got its start with Marxism, and how Lenin and Stalin continued to move it forward, and how it's being moved forward even in our country. But that term, I think it was Stalin said it first. One of them did anyway. Useful idiots. They called the people useful idiots who make no attempt to find out where they're being led, but just follow anyway. Right? Useful idiots. They were useful because they continued to move the agenda. Idiots because they didn't know what they were doing, just went along with it anyway. And do we have a population of useful idiots today? Absolutely. And you know what? They are without excuse, because if they open up their eyes, they'll be able to see what's going on. And they will not open their eyes. They're too busy promoting the agenda that they have bought into. You know what they call that? Drinking the Kool-Aid. Drinking the Kool-Aid. Now we've got an election coming soon, another vote that you can pass. I was shocked to find out that a tremendous number of Christians didn't even go to the polls. That's absurd. You know what that is? That's a spit in the eye of Jesus, right there. He says, I have given you authority that you will manifest my will in the world, and you're sitting where you are. Don't call yourselves Christians, folks. Another thing, if you're a useful idiot, you don't look at what is in front of you. So you don't find out, does what this one say agree with what you say, Lord? Does this one agree with what you say, Lord? Or do they disagree with you, Lord? Then I know where I'm going to vote. There are useful idiots who continue not to do that, and so many of them are in the church. And there is no perfect party, folks. And there is no perfect person to occupy the White House. But what you have to do is find out which one, which party, and which person is in agreement with God Almighty. That's what you need to do. And you don't get stuck, I was this all my life, I'll be that my left wrist, my father was this, my mother, yeah. One of the reasons we're in the situation we're in right now is because people didn't open their eyes and look. They simply said, I'm this and I'm going to stay that. Well, you know what? I used to be a fallen being. I'm not anymore. Because I opened my eyes and I accepted the gift that was offered to me. And I didn't just go with the flow. Amen? Well, enough for that, all right? I don't even know how I got started on that. But I'm going to show that video because it will open your eye. And I know your eyes are open, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But they will be open even more. And you know what? That way, as we can spread the gospel, we can also spread the truth found in Christ, right? And tell people, look, you have an opportunity to influence in God's name. Do it. Right? Where was I? Okay. So, let's take one final look at the ram and how, as Jesus, the ram relates to his church. As the message of redemption begins with the ram, it ends with Aries facing back toward the previous sign, Pisces, the king of the fishes. And I think this is a symbol of Christ as the Aleph and the Tav, the beginning and the end. In the picture in the sky, you have the ram looking back at the king of the fishes. So there's a connection between the two. The beginning and the end. And their relationship, one to the other, is really important. Jesus died as the Lamb of God and rose as the king of the fishes and as the bridegroom. And it is to Jesus that all believers are bound. If you're a believer, you are bound to the Lord Jesus Christ. We are bound to him, and we are bound to each other by him. The Apostle Paul asked in Romans 8:34, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword?" None of it. None of it. Nothing will separate you from the love of Christ Jesus except your own stupidity. He will not separate from you. You must separate from him. You talk about love. My word. That's love. He will do everything not to separate from you. But you can separate from him. And he answered that rhetorical question, who will separate, in Romans 8:37-39, when he declared emphatically, "Yet in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us, for I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord." And finally, I want to show something that demonstrates the heavens declaring the glory of God in a way that speaks volumes. Remember that Jesus was crucified at Passover, which corresponds to the sign Aries. Do you suppose that's a coincidence? I don't. So what you're about to see, I've checked in my own astronomy program to find it to be accurate. Can you put that up, Camille?
Now I'm going to show you guys something.
Turn it
It's
up.
one of those things that just they really affect me. I have to admit. I mean, I get the prickle on the back of the neck. You know, sometimes these things put me in tears. Maybe they do you too. I don't know. I want to show something now that's going to make you just marvel at God. I want you to picture in your mind the geometry of a lunar eclipse. It's not really very hard. You just have the sun and the earth and the moon. They line up. The earth gets between the sun and the moon and blocks the light. Okay, so they're lined up. When you look at a lunar eclipse from Earth, the moon gets dark. But if you were to go to the moon and look back, what would you see? You'd see the Earth coming between you and the sun, wouldn't you? You'd see a solar eclipse, wouldn't you? Okay, because that's the reverse. So I'm going to do something now that I think you'll find interesting. We're now on the moon. You're standing on the moon, you're looking back towards the sun. That's the Earth. I want to show you now the moment of Christ passing on the cross. That's 3 p.m. That's Aries, the paschal lamb, the ram, the constellation Aries, at the very instant of Christ's death. I'll show you again. He is expiring right now. And the heart of the ram is put out. Jesus, your paschal lamb. This evening, as you're kind of digesting what you've seen here today, let yourself think about what this says about God, about the level of structure that he built into the universe to announce the coming and passing of our Messiah.
John 9, verse 4, Jesus declared, "As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." You know, think of the sun as the Father God. Think of the moon as the one who reflects this light of the sun, Jesus. Think of the earth as the fallen one that separates Father and Son. That I see. The eclipsing, the earth eclipses the sun. Matthew 27, verses 45 to 46. Now from the 6th hour till the 9th hour, that is from noon till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there was darkness over all the land. And about the 9th hour, that is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Matthew 27, verses 50 to 51. Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth quaked and the rocks were split. And now I want to read something from the testimony of Tertullian, a distinguished defender of the Christian faith who was born 160 A.D., which is about 130 years after the crucifixion of Christ. He is a Roman historian. About, I think it was 1997, 1998, somewhere around there, I spent a day in the library in Orlando, Florida. And I spent that whole day on Tertullian's work. So I think it was 10 volumes, big volumes. It's on the web now, but I'm not sure that it's all that trustworthy. I found stuff that I researched back in the early days from the written word that I've seen on the web now that's been changed. So you got to be careful. You have to be careful. But what I'm about to read to you, I read with my own eyes from the printed page. Okay? And I'm saying this because this is going to tie in with what we've seen. The darkness. You know, that when Jesus was crucified at the time of the ram, being the ram caught in the thicket, that he is caught up in our mess is really what it amounts to, you know. And that there really was darkness. And they thought it was an eclipse, but it wasn't an eclipse. Not only that, eclipses don't last very long. This went on for a long time. But there's more to it. We can find this in chapter 21 of Tertullian's Apology. It says this: But the Jews were so exasperated by his teachings, Christ's teachings, by their own rulers and chiefs, were convinced of the truth, chiefly because so many turned aside to him, that they brought him before Pilate, Pontius Pilate, at the time Roman governor of Syria, and by the violence of their outcries against him, extorted to a sentence, giving him up to them to be crucified. He himself had predicted this, which, however, would have signified little had it not been the prophets of old done it as well. And yet, nailed upon the cross, he exhibited many notable signs by which his death was distinguished from all others. At his own free will, he, with a word, dismissed from him his spirit, anticipating the executioner's work. In the same hour, too, the light of the day was withdrawn, when the sun at the very time was in his meridian blaze. The sun is high in the sky, and now the light is gone. Those who were not aware that this had been predicted about Christ no doubt thought that it was an eclipse. You yourselves have the account of this world portent still in your archives, and that's speaking of the Roman senatorial docket. So they had it all written in their records, that there was darkness in the land on that afternoon. Then, when his body was taken down from the cross and placed in the sepulchre, the Jews, in their eager watchfulness, surrounded it with a large military guard, lest, as he had predicted his resurrection from the dead on the third day, his disciples might remove by stealth his body and deceive even the incredulous. But lo, on the third day there was a sudden shock of earthquake, and the stone which sealed the sepulchre was rolled away, and the guard fled off in terror, without a single disciple near. The grave was found empty of all but the clothes of the buried one. He goes on to say, of all these things related to Christ, Pilate himself, in his conscience already a Christian, sent an account to Tiberius, then the emperor. And here's what Pontius Pilate wrote to Tiberius Caesar concerning the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, he wrote a very long report. He was the governor, and he had to report what was going on to Caesar, Tiberius Caesar. Tiberius Caesar, I haven't put that here, but again, I saw it with my own eyes, no matter what somebody might read today on the web, that Tiberius Caesar said to the Roman government, I want you to declare Jesus of Nazareth a god. And they refused. And the reason they refused was because they said, you are Caesar, you are God. But he wanted Jesus to be classified as a Roman god. Not as the God, but as a Roman god. Because he believed what was reported to him. And one of the reporters was Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate and his wife are both canonized in the Coptic Church. Do you all know that? They're canonized. They're considered saints. So all this stuff about how evil he was and this, that, it's not true. Pontius Pilate was convinced. When you read his full report, he actually makes a statement. He said, I didn't know about this Jesus, but I heard him, and I thought, he doesn't seem to want to stir people up against Rome. He wants to promote peace. So he invited Jesus to come to his praetorium, and Jesus came. And Pilate said, I like what you say. I think that you're not an enemy of Rome, but a friend, and the rich and powerful Jews want to kill you, but I will protect you. And Jesus said, you can't protect me. What is going to happen must happen. And he said, but you don't know who I am. I'm Pontius Pilate. I can protect you. Jesus said, no, you can't. It's going to happen. Well, Pilate wrote this regarding the crucifixion. A loud clamor was heard. A loud clamor was heard proceeding from Golgotha, which, born of the winds, seemed to announce an agony such as was never heard by mortal ears. Dark clouds lowered over the pinnacle of the temple, and setting over the city, covered it as with a veil. So dreadful were the signs that men saw both in the heavens and on the earth, that Dionysius is reported to have exclaimed, either the author of nature is suffering, or the universe is falling apart. Whilst these appalling scenes of nature were transpiring, there was a dreadful earthquake in Lower Egypt, which filled everybody with fear and scared the superstitious Jews almost to death. I should have got you to read that. Our debt, the one that Adam left us, came between father and son on that day as the light of the sun was eclipsed by the fallen earth. Perhaps a picture of the fall that put Jesus on the cross. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, "For he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him." Our great God is a revealer of all who will seek him. If you will seek him with all your heart, he'll reveal to you. He doesn't desire to hold anything from us. He wants us to know. Hebrews 1 verses 1 to 4. Chapter 1 verses 1 to 4. God, who has at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds, who, being the brightness of his glory, the apokosma, the brightness of his glory, and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high, having become so much better than the angels, as he has by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they, the name above every other name. He is the preeminent one. In the Mazzaroth, the consecrated, we see the beginning and the end, the first and the last, the promise and its fulfillment, the contract and God's own signature, the Aleph and the Tav, the cause and the effect. Truly, in countless ways, the heavens declare the glory of God in Christ Jesus. Truly. Amen. Amen.